Before we begin the presentation, I'd like to recognize Supervisor Stork to give some opening remarks. Supervisor Stork, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And to be very brief, this is really our opportunity as a community, not that we won't have more, but this is a first really significant opportunity to listen and understand what's possible for our community, as well as what we may want. And the Huntington Metro area, as all of you know, is a long-standing hub of urbanization for us, and that speed of urbanization is increasing even further. We have a number of buildings that have been built that are high rises, and we have one that we're just getting ready to cut the ribbon on at Wesley Housing. It's an affordable housing right next to the Metro, and we are currently working very hard at Huntington Club to try to bring that development forward. There's been a lot of issues with it. The county has stepped up and done a number of things to try to support the community and the developer. And again, we still have challenges with that. And then on the upper side, the Kings Highway side, you see a lot of new building construction going on. And then WMATA has some plans for construction there too. So lots to pay attention to, and how we support in the transit oriented development that we create there, and the fact that we need to make it friendly to pedestrians and bicyclists and really all other kinds of transportation is the core of why I'm glad you're here to listen and learn and provide and share your comments. So with that, I will do the same for a good while. I have another meeting I'll be going to, but I'm looking forward to listening for a while. And regardless, if you have any questions or comments, you're more than welcome to email them to my office directly, which is MTVERNON, that's Mount Vernon at fairfaxcounty.gov. So with that, look forward to listening in and hearing your voices throughout this process. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Supervisor. So now I'll pull up the slides. So again, my name is Tim Kutz. I'm from the Fairfax County Department of Transportation. First, before we get into the active transportation study itself, have Graham Owen here. He's from the Department of Planning and Development to speak about the Huntington Metrorail Plan Amendment. So we'll get to that after we cover the agenda. So agenda, again, we'll give a background and purpose for the study, as well as some background, as I said, on the plan amendment for the Metrorail station. We'll go over the methodology. So what went into this study, how were the pedestrian, bicycle facilities around the Huntington Transit Station area assessed? And we looked at several different analysis scenarios, existing conditions, of course, and then looking ahead to the future, given the county's current plans, and kind of trying to go beyond those current plans to recommend further improvements. So we have 3 different scenarios to look at. And so after that, we'll follow up with a review of the recommendations that came out of the study, and sort of talk about next steps. So what can we learn from the study, and how can we sort of try to implement some of these things going forward? And we'll have plenty of time, of course, for comments and questions. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to Graham to talk about the plan amendment.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. So real quick, just to kind of set the stage, my component of this presentation is going to be fairly brief. We've been working with the Mount Vernon SSPA task force for about 2 years on a plan amendment that would be looking at not just active transportation as it relates to the TSA, but also a land use study that relates to the Huntington Metrorail station. And so what we've done is, since these were studies that were happening at the same time, we coordinated on these proposals. And as you'll see with the plan text that the task force recommended, we were able to front load some of the recommendations from the active transportation study into the plan amendment. So Tim will go over kind of next steps for the larger TSA study, but I just wanted to say that we have an active land use plan amendment that's being considered right now for the Metro station in particular. So in particular, this plan amendment, the subject site is outlined here in blue. It includes the Huntington Metrorail station and the planned bus rapid transit station, which would be the terminus for the BRT station along Route 1. The station includes today associated surface and structured parking. It also includes some vacant land that's immediately surrounding the station, east of North Kings Highway and then south of Huntington Avenue. The Huntington Metro Station, for those of you that are familiar with it, this would be kind of this is just a refresher, but it's the focal point of what's called the Huntington Transit Station area, or the TSA. And this is the area generally surrounding the station, which has also been the focus of the active transportation study. The Huntington Metro Station is also the focal point of the transit development area, which is a smaller area of planning geography that's most proximate to the Metrorail station and offers the most viable opportunities for development and redevelopment. So Tim, if you would go to the next slide. So the site consists of 3 parcels, and those are located in what's called Land Unit E of the Huntington Community Planning Sector. Currently, the comprehensive plan recommends public facilities on the Huntington Metrorail area, which is this larger area that's shown in parcel 88D and then parcel 17E. And then that recommendation is supplemented or kind of overlaid by what's known as a development option, which includes a recommendation for mixed uses, including residential and office uses. Parcel 1A, which is a smaller parcel that's kind of that teardrop shape, right? Thanks, Tim. That is planned for office uses currently. With the adopted plan option, however, a lot of the redevelopment has occurred south of the station in the area called the Courts at Huntington, as well as a development they can't see here, but it's immediately adjacent to the lettering for parcel 88D, known as Abington. And so there is no additional residential development potential, as we call it, that's available for implementation on the site today. So essentially, no additional residential could be built under the current plan for this site today. And so that, as well as the south station, the south garage closing, has compelled a new look at the comprehensive plan for this specific study. Tim, if you would advance to the next slide, please. All right, and so the Board of Supervisors authorized a plan amendment to look at the entirety of the Huntington Metrorail site and that adjacent parcel as a new planning study area, and asked staff to consider a maximum floor area ratio of 1.5 FAR, which is about 1.8 million square feet of primarily residential development. And I'll explain, in further details, exactly kind of what that land use mix is that we've been looking at. In any case, some of the development is anticipated to occur south of the station along North Kings Highway, and then some of it is anticipated to occur at a later phase on the Huntington Avenue frontage once that north garage reaches the end of its useful life. Next slide, please, Tim. So this is what we call the quantification of the plan amendment. So this is looking at the total increase in development intensity and density that's associated with the plan amendment. So in a nutshell, the net increase that's being requested with this planning study is 1,500 up to a maximum, I should say, a maximum of 1,500 net new multifamily units over the current plan recommendation. And then additionally, 86,000 additional square feet of new office potential and 9,000 square feet of retail potential. So these uses would be provided in low, mid, and high-rise building types between 55 feet and 200 feet. So that's kind of the maximum density scenario. And one of the things that we'll say is when we do our impacts analysis for these across systems, so transportation, environment, schools, parks, public facilities, that's what we study is kind of this is the maximum that we'd be looking at to try to understand what are the potential impacts of a development of this scale. Next slide, please, Tim. All right, and so I'll save the kind of the meat of the plan amendment, since the primary focus of this meeting is the active transportation planning effort. But if you're interested in the planning study that's underway, the task force that Supervisor Stork had take a look at this, known as the SSPA task force. They produced recommendations on the planning study on July the 11th. Some of those recommendations included recommendations that resulted from this active transportation planning effort. And as I mentioned, we've been able to front load some of those recommendations into that task force draft as they relate to the frontages in particular. So I'll just kind of give it away now, but the planning study that was recommended by, or the plan amendment that was recommended by the task force includes a 10-foot wide shared use path with a minimum 8-foot wide landscape amenity panel with street trees along the North Kings Highway frontage to accommodate pedestrians and cyclists of all ages and abilities. And then in addition to that, on the Huntington Avenue frontage, there would be improved bicycle and pedestrian facilities with streetscape, and that could be accomplished including through repurposing existing right-of-way inside the curb, such as the right turn lane along the site frontage. So Just more details can be found in the task force draft, which is on the SSPA website. I would just mention that the task force has concluded their work. Their recommendation was produced on July the 11th, and we are gearing up for public hearings later on in the fall. So Planning Commission tentatively scheduled for October the 19th, and the board hearing tentatively scheduled for December the 6th. So I'll pause there. There's a lot more to the planning study in terms of the land uses, but generally speaking, we have the task force has produced a recommendation that would enable the maximum density scenario, 1,500 net new units, and the non-residential intensity as well, consistent with the urban design framework that was developed as a part of that planning study. So I'll happy to answer any questions, but I'll kind of turn it over to Tim. I just want to give a kind of a brief overview of that land use study since it relates to the active transportation planning effort.
Great, thank you, Graham. Yeah, we'll keep it rolling, and we'll have a big Q&A session at the very end if that's all right with everybody. So whoops. Yeah, some of you joining tonight might not even know what active transportation is, so I think we got to start there when talking about this study. And really, active transportation is something that the county has been focused on as of late at improving, and that's not just walking, biking, but hiking, running, rolling in a wheelchair, using a stroller, riding on a scooter, all different ways of getting around. So it's kind of an all-encompassing term. And so a couple other efforts that the county is doing include the Active Fairfax Transportation Plan. And that's a county-wide effort to sort of coordinate and consolidate the existing trails plan and the bicycle master plan. And so that's going to include updated guidance, updated policy recommendations, and then also a facility selection toolkit. So how, where certain facilities should be located, and, different characteristics of those facilities to better serve biking, walking, and other modes of active transportation. As part of that effort, there's also a Safe Streets for All component. And this initiative was really set off to make our streets safer in Fairfax County, address systemic transportation safety issues. There are a number of different recommendations in that study, and I have the links here that we can share after the meeting. But updating safety policy, design guidelines for safer facilities, creating safety audits, walking audits, and really trying to use crash data. Number one, collecting that data, and then trying to use that to pinpoint where we can make improvements to our active transportation facilities to make them safer and more accommodating for everybody, all users. So that's a really great effort that was just endorsed by the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors in May of this year, and is really just kind of getting started. We're seeing how that's going to be fleshed out in the coming years. So we'll have a little bit more on the active transportation study, the countywide study that is, at the end with a timeline. So this study, what is it? How did it start? Of course, the timing sort of worked out with the plan amendment effort for the Metrorail station, but it really came out of a grant opportunity. There's a regional body that has a grant that goes out every year to look at active transportation connectivity to metro, connectivity via transit in general. And so we've kind of took advantage of that, and had a team of consultants work with us to look at this area. And you can see it's highlighted in red. This is the TSA, so a larger area than kind of what Graham was showing in the middle there, where you see Huntington Metro, to look at the TSA as a whole and see how well it's connected today and how we might be able to improve that connectivity in the future. So that's really the big goal of this study, was to look at connectivity and comfort for active transportation users. And you can see today, the network is not actually that bad. There's all these blue lines on the map are sidewalks, so it's a fairly well established network. But there are, of course, ways that you could improve those facilities. and fill in some of the gaps that exist today. So a bit more about the Transportation Planning Board, which is really the folks that sort of organize this grant and administer the grant. They're housed at the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, also known as COG. They administer this grant. They've been doing this since 2007, and they've done 167 planning projects throughout the region. Really helpful way of kind of coordinating transportation and land use connectivity in these sort of focus areas where we're seeing transit-oriented development. And so as part of this project, a consultant team was selected. Fair & Peers was the lead project consultant, and they have a lot of experience. The county's worked with them in the past on similar projects focused on active transportation, and certainly done a lot of work in metro stations around the region, as well as a subcontractor, Roadside and Hardwell. And they really assisted with the data collection and review of planning documents. And of course, goes without saying that we had Fairfax County Department of Transportation staff, as well as the planning department and other departments that helped, flesh this report out and really made this study worthwhile. So how is this different from other transportation studies? If you're familiar with the plan amendment study, for example, or any other transportation studies throughout the county, a lot of the metrics are focused on how we can improve traffic, and that's vehicular traffic, how we can improve delay, how we can improve level of service for vehicles. So really we wanted to focus on the metrics that would look at, how do we improve comfort, safety, and access for pedestrians and cyclists. And so one of those metrics that we've started to use a little more regularly in the county is pedestrian level of comfort. And Fair & Peers has a tool that looks at this, and another metric, which I'll explain later. To take these characteristics, such as the pathway, the width of the pathway, whether there's a buffer present for the pedestrian, if there's pedestrian scale lighting, and look at those and come up with a score from 1 to 4, as you can see here, just to show us how comfortable the given facility or segment of the sidewalk might be. So you can see here, level of comfort 1 is kind of top of the line, highly comfortable for all ages and abilities, all the way down to level 4, LOC 4, that is, where walking is very uncomfortable. So there might be no sidewalk, there might be very, very little buffer or separation between the pedestrian and traffic, or higher speed traffic on the adjacent roadway. Those sorts of things can make walking in an area uncomfortable. Similar concept, bicycle level of traffic stress. We've used this in several studies in Fairfax County as well. And we've applied it here to look at how comfortable it is for people biking on the roadways. So LTS 1, that's comfortable, again, for all ages and abilities, all the way down to LTS 4. You have a very high traffic stress situation. You're biking on a roadway that has a lot of volume, vehicular volume, and higher speeds. And so most of the population is not going to be comfortable on that facility or on that roadway. So this slide, I will admit, is a little overwhelming. So if we can just focus on the top here and on the side of this first table, the report itself includes a number of these tables. This one in particular, table 1, is looking at bicycles in mixed traffic. So that's a bicycle riding down the roadway. And again, to get to those different level of traffic stress scores, you're looking at a number of variables. So you're looking at number of lanes, you're looking at the ADT, which is the average daily traffic, and you're looking at the speed. So obviously you have higher traffic, you have higher count of lanes, and you have higher speeds, it's going to be a less comfortable and more stressful facility. And so in order to improve upon that, you would sort of implement measures that would, for one, separate the cyclists from that traffic, or try to lower the speed limit, reduce the number of lanes, for example. On the other side, we have pedestrian level of comfort. So a number of different factors could play into pedestrians' level of comfort. These are just a few of them. Buffer width being one, as I said, usable sidewalk width, how wide the pathway is, the quality of the sidewalk, whether it's an even, smooth surface or if there are cracks, the pavement's failing. So all these different things, you can see how they relate to a level of comfort. You have more lanes, less comfort, less space to walk, less comfort. Makes sense. That being said, these are just tools. We understand that context is important, and then there are, as I said, a lot of different variables that can play a factor into someone's level of comfort. And people might feel that some of these variables are more important than others. So, recognizing that there are limitations with this, I think, is important. But even still, it's a good tool to use to sort of get an idea of where we can target some of these problem areas of concern, and recommend improvements. And so how was this data used and how was it analyzed? So Fair and Peers, the consultant team that worked on this study, uses what they call a weakest link analysis. And so as you can see here, we're looking at Huntington Avenue, and this is west of Metroview Parkway. So the metro station is behind us, looking towards Telegraph. And you can see the characteristics of the roadway on the left. So 30-mile-per-hour road. The average daily traffic is above 15,000 cars per day. Lane count is 4. So all these different factors combine to give you the various scores for bicycle level of traffic stress and pedestrian level of comfort. And you can see which of those factors apply to each. So for bicycle level of traffic stress, you have posted speed, average daily traffic, lane count, and then you take the lowest score, or the worst score, I should say, and that is your overall score. Same for the pedestrian. You're looking at posted speed, lane count, buffer type, buffer width, sidewalk quality, and lighting, and you're taking the worst score. So that's one way of doing it. That's how it was done for this study. The county is doing similar projects where we've looked at taking an average score. So if you were to take the average score for either of these and round accordingly, you would get an overall score of 3. So a different result, different way of doing things, but for this study, it served a good purpose, and again helped us identify some of the areas that we wanted to target for recommendations and improvements. So again, I mentioned at the beginning, we used this analysis for several scenarios. We looked at the existing conditions, of course, and then the future baseline, which I'll go into in a minute, looked at the current planning documents in the county. So what we have in the trails plan, the bike plan, the area plans, took into consideration those recommendations and gave us kind of a baseline of what the future might look like if those recommendations were implemented. And then we went a step further and said, okay, well, our goal here is to get to a level of comfort of 2 and a level of traffic stress of 2. So how can we achieve that? And what recommendations do we need to put forward in order to achieve that level? Another component of the study was pedestrian crossings. So that's obviously very important when you have these major roadways, these minor arterials. Telegraph Road, Kings Highway, Huntington Avenue, is actually finding a place where you can cross safely. So they did Fair and Peers and RHI did sort of a walk and validated the different crossings around the TSA to see how well spaced they are, and also where are they missing certain crossings. So certain areas did not have crosswalks on all legs, for example. You can see that in the red here. The green, you have crosswalks on every leg of the intersection. And they also indicated where there are large gaps. So you have to walk quite a bit of distance to get between one crossing and the next. And so when you have that situation, obviously you can imagine people are going to maybe not cross where it's a controlled crosswalk. And so they noted that here. Huntington Avenue between Biscayne Drive and Foley Street, you have 2,000 feet approximately of space between those crossings, and kind of on down the list here. So part of the study was to look at ways at which we can maybe minimize those crossing distances, or distances between crossings, I should say. So getting into existing conditions, and could we have everybody mute their mics, please? Sounds like we have a hot mic. Thank you. So getting into existing conditions. So you can see the scale at the bottom right here for each. So the map on the left, we're looking at pedestrian level of comfort. Again, 1 being the most comfortable, and 4 with the red being least comfortable. And then similar situation over here, looking at bicycle level of traffic stress. And you can see not a great situation today, if you're going by this metric, that is. We have a lot of red, certainly on the pedestrian level of comfort side. You see some more comfortable areas in the residential and local streets. But Telegraph Road, Kings Highway, Huntington Avenue, on both maps are mostly red. And so that was really the big focus here of this study is, we want to improve all these streets if we can, but really looking at Kings Highway and Huntington Avenue in particular. One thing I'll note on these maps and the maps going forward, this was a small grant that we were working with, limited resources. It was a pretty relatively quick study. That being said, we didn't look at every street in the TSA. So we looked at streets where we kind of used our judgment to say, all right, these are streets that kind of serve the connection to the Huntington Metrorail station, or serve other area assets such as the Huntington Community Center that you see here. So just a limited number of streets were assessed. Obviously, if you're from the Jefferson Manor community, you know that there have been some recent improvements to the sidewalk infrastructure here, especially along Edge Hill and other areas, other streets in that community, which are not included in the assessment. So still want to take credit for those. So again, this is looking into the future baseline for pedestrian comfort, taking into consideration some of the recommendations that we have in the trails plan, the bike plan. And we also included some recommendations from the Jefferson Manor and the MVCCA resolution, North Kings Highway resolution, which looked at how to make pedestrian improvements along North Kings Highway. That was sort of one of the challenges we had in looking at the space on North Kings Highway, given the BRT system that's going to be using that stretch up into the metro station. And how do we sort of work with that to provide more space and improve comfort for people walking along Kings Highway? But these were the recommendations that were considered to produce this result. And again, not great. I mean, there's certainly areas you could see that we would want to improve, given the scale on the bottom right, showing the level of comfort here. I will note, of course, none of these improvements are funded, and any design, of course, would be subject to the expected impacts, the costs. Again, we have to consider context here and how these recommendations could actually be implemented. Again, this is just a study to sort of see what could be possible to improve infrastructure here. But things do get better for bicycle level of traffic stress, given the baseline considerations, and in large part that's due to taking the cyclist off the roadway. So certainly for Huntington Avenue, if the cyclist is then able to use a shared use path along the entirety from Richmond Highway to Telegraph Road, that's going to be a much more comfortable situation than riding in mixed traffic. So you see a lot more improvement from the bicyclist standpoint than you do for the pedestrian. So going beyond that, one concept that we had looked at, and some of you all may be familiar with, is the concept of a road diet. And essentially, as you can see, what that does in the picture is you're taking away space from the vehicle and then repurposing that for other uses. So you can see here you have some on-street parking with some street trees with the curb kind of bumping out here. You also have dedicated bicycle lanes. You've removed the travel lanes. You're down to one in this situation. You have a dedicated transit lane. You have some streeteries, as you might call them here, some other uses that kind of take advantage of that extra space. So that's an extreme example. Typically in the county, what we're looking at is a 4-lane roadway, 2 travel lanes in each direction, and you reduce that down to a 3-lane roadway, and you have 2 travel lanes in each direction and then a center turn lane that you can use for left turns. So we've thought that Huntington Avenue might be a good candidate for a road diet. So again, that would be removing 1 through lane in each direction between Telegraph Road and Richmond Highway, and then providing accommodations for cyclists and a wider sidewalk. So that is one thing that was included in the recommendations that we'll show on the next slide. But given this, I just want to kind of throw the disclaimer out there that this would need further study if this is something that the county would pursue as an improvement. Traffic analysis certainly would need to be more in depth than what we used for this study to see what the impacts are, but something that could be possible in the future. So another sort of busy map, but this is kind of all the recommendations that we've sort of come up with in kind of going beyond that baseline recommendation. So again, trying to accommodate cyclists off street on Telegraph Road as well, on North Kings Highway. And you'll notice that some of these recommendations aren't just improving the quality of the sidewalk or widening the sidewalk, but also potentially reducing the speed. And again, I'll mention with that too, another disclaimer, obviously any reduction to speed, any adjustment to the vehicular lanes and the space, along the roadway would be, subject to coordination with VDOT. So that kind of goes without saying, but just wanted to make that disclaimer here. But obviously slower speeds would help. That would help comfort. That would help cyclists that are on the road, certainly. And so you can see, a whole number of things that kind of get us to that pedestrian level of comfort 2 for the entire TSA. And there's other areas that even, go beyond that. Pedestrian scale lighting is a big one too. I mean, we have a lot of areas around the TSA that are not well lit. And so doing simple things like adding pedestrian scale lighting, just doing some of these small maintenance, sidewalk maintenance projects could help comfort as well. And even better situation as expected for bicycle level traffic stress. You see, again, you're taking the cyclists off the road in many of these cases, creating a separation from traffic. You have, again, all the things, all the recommendations that kind of went along with the pedestrian map, reducing vehicular speeds on Huntington Avenue, on North Kings Highway. Those would obviously help reduce traffic stress and improve comfort. So again, that's a big list. That's a big list of recommendations that would obviously cost a lot of money and a lot of time. So I don't want to, certainly the intent of this is not to get people's hopes up and say that, this is all going to get done and it's all going to get done now. This study was really to just sort of step back and look at the transit station area and see where we can make the biggest kind of bang for our buck improvements. And it seems really that Huntington Avenue and North Kings are the focus and where we can really make some big strides in connectivity by kind of following through with some of these recommendations. So if you want some more information on the study, we do have the report published online. And as Graham noted, we do consider a lot of these, at least along North Kings Highway and along Huntington Avenue as part of the Metro Plan Amendment. We've also kind of added in a recommendation to increase connectivity across Huntington Avenue, so a mid-block crossing just north of the station to get, improve access to the Cameron Run Trail. So that was another major recommendation that went into the plan amendment. So as Graham noted, again, the Planning Commission hearing for the Metrorail Plan Amendment is on October 19th, and then the Board of Supervisors hearing is scheduled for December 6th. I mentioned at the outset that there's the larger active Fairfax plan, which is the county-wide plan. And here's sort of on the right what that looks like and what their timeline looks like. They're currently in phase 2. They're developing now their facility selection and design toolkit recommendations. And eventually the recommendations, at least some of the recommendations from this study that are pertinent and are priorities would carry forward into that, into that plan, along with all the other areas in Fairfax County where we're updating guidance for active transportation. And so, of course, this study is concluded. Again, it was a grant that has run its course, but that does not mean the work is over. Board of Supervisors has been focusing a lot of attention on active transportation funding over the past several years. And you all may have heard of the federal funding that has become available for active transportation and safe access to schools. So the county, of course, will be looking for opportunities to fund some of these and actually implement them in the future. So with that, here's my email, my phone number, and happy to take any comments or questions that you all have. And hopefully we have plenty of time left over for that. Looks like we do. So if anybody wants to raise their hand, please do so. If you're on the phone, you can use *6 to raise your hand. And it looks like we have Brian Esty. You can go ahead. So you have your hand raised.
Hi, thanks so much. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So my name is Brian Esty. I live in Farrington Place condos, and I'm also on the board there. I was just curious, I guess it's more of a zoning question. So that plan amendment is only applying to the sort of grounds of the metro station. Am I understanding that correctly from the presentation?
Right. So let me go back a few slides. So the plan amendment is really kind of this section. Actually, this is probably a better map. The plan amendment really is here, this kind of blue shaded area. So that's what the plan amendment is looking at addressing. This study, the Huntington Active Transportation Study, is sort of considering beyond that. So the wider area you can see outlined in red here.
Got it. Perfect. Because we were at the request of some of our ownership, our various owners within the community, we are exploring the opportunity to sell our entire complex. So I just wanted to make sure, because that density cap applied to just our plot would be really bad, but because it's really not affecting us, that's not a problem.
Gotcha. Right. Gotcha.
All right. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you. Looks like we have Jason up next. Go ahead, Jason.
Hey, Tim. Thanks for this. I mean, I just had a question. When the slide showing the timeline for this, it looked like the final recommendations would come through at the end of 2023, which would mean probably any kind of implementation wouldn't take place to 2024 at the earliest. And I guess my question is, do all improvements on, say, Huntington and Kings Highway have to be within this part of this process? And the reason I ask that is that one of the constant things that comes up in the Huntington Community Association meeting is the intersection, basically where Huntington and Hunting Creek is, basically for where you can go over from the shopping center by Richmond Highway over to the Riverside towers. And I mean, there are just pedestrians just running across there all the time outside of a crosswalk. You got basically a 5-way intersection of cars turning left both directions. And it's extremely dangerous today. And so I guess my question is there any type of process to do a review of things like that now, or does this all have to be part of this process, which means we basically would be looking at 2024 at the earliest for something to change there?
Sure. So I'll take a step back. I mean, this is kind of A lot of information in one presentation. So we are actually talking about 3 different plans almost in this one presentation. So Graham talked about the plan amendment, which is really again focused on the Huntington Metrorail. This study, the subject of tonight, is the active transportation study, which looks at the TSA, and then this timeline is for the active Fairfax transportation plan. So that's the countywide plan. So this is the the much larger study. So this timeline doesn't apply to the Huntington active transportation study. That study is actually concluded, the Huntington one. But to answer your other question, the Board of Supervisors has asked FCDOT staff to identify a lot of those, kind of quick hit, like the one you mentioned, quick hit improvements around the county. So if you send me that one, I'd be happy to pass that along to staff and see if they're not aware of that. But the board did authorize $100 million to address these active transportation improvements over the next 6 years, and they've already identified some funding, $5 million, I believe, to sort of start on improving some of those, or low-hanging fruit improvements. Obviously not the big infrastructure capital projects that are going to take several years. So to answer your question, yeah, we are being a little more proactive in identifying those, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a years long wait to get some of those things. That being said, of course, everything's, it's a big county, a lot of competition for projects, but definitely making strides and trying to address some of the low hanging fruit.
All right, that's good to know. Appreciate it.
Sure. Let's see. Did we have Brian? Did you have another question, or your hand might just be still up?
No more questions. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. Looks like we do have a comment in the chat from Colleen. Thanks so much for sharing the study. I live off of Huntington Avenue and walk to the daycare. Pedestrian comfort is key for my family. I support all these recommendations. Hopefully at least some of them get funded. Thanks, Colleen. So any more questions on the study? Any more questions on the recommendations, the methodology we used? Happy to answer those tonight. And Graham's still on if you want to ask questions on the plan amendment. All right. Well, we do have a pretty small group tonight, so if there are no more questions, I suppose we can end a little early. Last call if anybody has questions or comments. Again, my email is up on the screen, and you have the project website. We do have the report posted. We'll get the meeting recording posted along with the slides, so that you all can kind of read this information at your leisure. But certainly feel free to reach out to me. Supervisor Stork offered his staff as well, and Graham for the plan amendment. But really thank everybody for coming out, spending their night hearing about the study, and thanks for your interest. And with that being said, we'll wrap it up. Everybody have a good night. I'm gonna end the recording and see you all next time.
Thanks, Tim. See ya.
See ya.